Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me. My name is Jeremy Coughlin, and I'm the VP of Enterprise Analytics at Coast Capital Savings. So today I'm going to be speaking about how Coast is carving out a niche in the financial services industry. So just quickly, a bit of background on credit unions before I dive into Coast Capital. So credit unions are like banks. They offer financial services like mortgages and checking accounts and things like that. But there's one key difference is that in that banks are owned by shareholders, whereas credit unions are owned by their members. So at the end of the year, when there's profits to be divvied up, banks divide those profits to shareholders, and credit unions provide those back to the members. Credit unions were typically established by groups that were underserved. So people that were either geographically isolated, they're in remote communities that banks couldn't serve well, or potentially they had jobs like fishermen that didn't really work well with the banking model. Currently in Canada, there's over 233 different credit unions that have over 1,700 branches, and there's just under 6 million Canadians who are credit union members. So Coast Capital Savings is the largest credit union in Canada by membership. We have over 40 branches, and we offer a full suite of financial services, mortgages, checkings, accounts, etc. The key difference between us and most of the other credit unions is that we're federally regulated. So a few years back, we decided to apply for a license to go federal. We got that 3 years ago. And so now we can serve people across Canada, whereas most credit unions are provincially regulated, so they can only service members in their home province. I'd also like to call out Coast Capital has really great digital services. So we have an award-winning app that has kind of all the typical features you'd expect, like the ability to e-transfer and look up, say, balances, but also really cool kind of money management features and account aggregation features. So our members really like that about Coast. So going into a little bit of the background, this is a highly competitive industry. Most people are familiar with the traditional banks, so the big five, like CIBC, TD, etc. Those big banks have a lot of scale. They have branches on kind of every corner. They can, with that scale, afford to do a lot of advertising. They can afford to hire really big agencies. They can also afford to invest in big technology and cutting edge things. So the banks have a big role in the Canadian financial services sector. We also have a whole bunch of new entrants, so the fintechs or financial technology companies. And these organizations are essentially disrupting how things have historically worked. Some of them are deliberately looking to disintermediate banks. So they're doing things that banks used to do, but they're kind of doing them in a different way or with technology. In many cases, they're doing things that are like exclusively online. So that doesn't have, say, the cost structure that the banks would have. And in many cases, they can deliver things more seamlessly because they don't have, legacy, technology to work with. There's also, of course, the cryptocurrencies, the Bitcoins, et cetera, that are changing the way Canadians think about their money and how to invest it. And then, we have a huge kind of tide of rising expectations that's driven by the big tech companies like Apple and Amazon. As people experience those products and those kind of seamless services, they begin to expect that from kind of all their service providers, which for, again, a company the size of Coast, that's can be quite costly. Finally, there's socioeconomic issues. So there are with COVID specifically, when things shut down and then the bank decided to lower interest rates to spur growth, that has an immediate impact on Coast and how we are able to derive profit from the margin between what we lend and what we take in terms of people's deposits. There's also of course rising inflation that's impacting how people think about their investments. There's deep socioeconomic issues. There's a lot of discussion around the difference between the poor and the rich in different countries and how that factors into how people think about what's happening in the world and their financial institution. I also mentioned quickly open banking, which is a relatively new and not totally understood concept in Canada because it's still on its way and through kind of government right now. But the basic idea is that open banking is looking to make it a lot more straightforward for you to have access to your own banking information so that you can port it to whatever financial service provider that you want. Right now, it's pretty hard to switch products, and the view is that that's not necessarily ideal for Canadians. And so with the legislation is coming down that will require financial services providers to enable a more open platform. And finally, I guess it's not highlighted here, but I'll mention the other credit unions. So like I said, there's 233 of them. So that, when you contrast with the 5 big banks, you can see that means there's quite a number of credit unions, and it's kind of a fragmented space. But we largely view them as our friends and people that we want to work with and cooperate with. We have a common goal, which is only to help our members in their financial security. And so, we look to help them when we can. And we have some formal kind of mechanisms like through the CCUA that helps us coordinate, and the central one and the different centrals, they also help coordinate. So we look at the credit union as system as, kindred spirits. So there's a lot of things going on in this space that, makes it complicated for Canadians to figure out, like, where do I bank? Where do I, get a mortgage from? And for Coast, that means, how do we carve out a space in this really competitive and highly fragmented industry? And we need to find a way to, find Canadians that, we can serve and we can differentiate them. We can serve better than others. So 3 years ago, the baton was passed to Calvin, our new CEO, to, take Coast forward, expand nationally, and develop a new strategy. So we began with a literature review where we looked at what was happening globally in terms of different banking trends, trying to understand what of that could actually come back to Canada, what might make sense, looking at technology and the different trends. And we worked with some of the big consulting firms to kind of get that kind of lay of the land. Then we engaged with Environics to really understand kind of where we're at now, who are the members we're serving, like where do they live? Like we just need to understand our current strengths and weaknesses. And so that what Environics did for us is they took the Canadian market and segmented it into 10 groups that are primarily like life stage and socioeconomic driven. So like retirees, for example, would be one group. And so they broke the Canadian population into 10 groups. So that was really helpful because it provided us our first lens on, where are we successful? Like which groups do we have already high penetration and we have, good, products with them versus, groups that we didn't. And so we learned a lot of things through that, and we could dig through to the different attitudes that come with those PRISM profiles. And that was helpful in us in kind of starting to get our head around, like, what are we strong at and where can we build off of? And from those 10 segments, we did an initial first look and said, well, okay, can we really serve all of these people well? And our first pass was when we looked at them, we strategically made some decisions and said, no, we can't serve all these people well. They're not all necessarily aligned with, where we're going and what our strengths. And, for example, we looked at the, highly affluent, very wealthy people, and we said, probably not going to be perfect for Coast. Like, we're happy to serve them, and if they want to be our members, that's terrific. But we're not going to be able to do kind of all the white glove things that they might expect, and that's not really our roots and our focus. So we took kind of a strategic lens and said these particular groups are not exactly what where we're going, and we refined that to 5 groups. So we said of the 10, these 5 groups are going to be our focus. But that's still quite a large group. So we still had to find a way to further refine because that really only limited half of Canadians. So we started the next phase. We went into some custom market research. We started to really unpack the attitudes. We took what we learned from the PRISM profiles and we said, well, how can we go further and really understand, what are those unmet needs, or how do we really kind of bring to life, these different attitudes and values? And initially, because this work was done during COVID, I was personally concerned that, it's going to be really hard to do this type of work because normally you do it in, say, a focus group setting where someone would be behind a glass or a mirrored room, and they'd be, kind of talking about, how they view banking, and you kind of take your notes and learn from that. You can't do that because of COVID restrictions, so we moved to an online data collection where people were asked questions. They there's some moderated groups, but took selfies and submitted those, And it turned out to be really terrific. Like, it really brought to life, what we had kind of, seen with the Prism attitudes, and, helped us get a lot more clarity on, what were those unmet needs. And so that, helped us understand, okay, where we have strengths, some of our focus, where there's some unmet needs, and how can we kind of further unpack that, and starting to think about how do we find groups within those 5 Prism segments that might be really great for Coast to focus on. So the next step is we did a gap analysis again within Veronix, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in the next slides, but just quickly here, the idea that between the gap analysis is that we took our member data, each member, which products they have, like if they have a mortgage, how big is the mortgage balance, if they have a credit card, etc. We sent that to over 10 Veronix to match against the Wealthscape database, and that allowed us to say, in certain areas, for example, you'd know that 30% of all the households have a mortgage, but of our members, say only 10% have a mortgage, meaning likely that other 20% they have a mortgage with someone else. And so that helped us kind of start to understand, okay, well, here's the opportunity and what it looks like within our own members, and then also within the larger area. So because that was done at a very granular postal code level, we were able to build that up to branch and region profiles, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a second. So we did all this work, and then we brought it all together into our Coast 2025 strategy. And that's really kind of articulating, again, our purpose and our mission, but starting to really clarify, like, what does it mean to be a credit union now? And why is this value proposition still relevant for Canadians? So, what is a modern credit union, and, who are we going to focus on? So here's an example of some of the output from the gap analysis. And I'm highlighting this here because I think this has been particularly interesting and helpful, because it starts to give a lot of detailed and insight into, into what some people had as hunches, but it really puts everybody on the same page. So just, quickly to walk through a couple of this, that first line there, you see member penetration. So what you'll see is in that orange bar, which shows the member penetration for this area, which is V3. But then you also see that red line, which is the benchmark. So meaning for all of Coast Capital's areas. And so in this particular case, this V3 area, you can see that the orange bar is quite a bit further than the red line, meaning we have a much higher member penetration in this area. You'll notice the same thing with the household penetration, is that the orange bar is much longer, and that the benchmark line is kind of only halfway. What that means is this is a really good area for Coast Capital. Like, this is an area where we have a much higher penetration than average. Whatever we're doing, it's working. Like, this is, something's working right here. And so when you look it down at in the blue bars at the kind of detailed product level, you kind of see the same trend, that the bar is much further than the red line, meaning kind of across all products, this is an area of strength. And so what we can do from this is say, well, clearly something's going right here. How do we, leverage what we know about this specific region and bring that to other regions? So there's also a little bit more detail in the other couple columns. The market share, is a similar view, but it's by dollars, and it's red, so you can't see that quite as well. But and the final one, wallet share, kind of brings them all together. And so just quickly, the idea here, for example, mortgages, which is the second from bottom line, you can see that the blue lines, the red line is kind of halfway between the two blue bars, or between the length of the blue bars, meaning, again, this area, we have a higher penetration of mortgages than other areas. You kind of see the same thing with market share with the dollars, although the red's a little bit difficult to see there. But then finally, wallet share for mortgages, the red line is kind of right at the tip of the green bar, meaning, so we have a lot more mortgages in this area, but they're not any bigger than the mortgages we have in other areas. And so that in itself is interesting, because that trend doesn't hold up for all products. In some cases, it's different. We'll have, say, people will have GICs with us, but they're smaller. So you kind of can pull all that information out of this view, and it's super helpful. Another one of the views that comes out of here is kind of a regional summary. And what this helps us understand is, at a kind of a glance, where do we have different strategies or tactics needed? And so when you just look at the kind of the blue squares, for example, in that first column, those are areas essentially that we need to do something new. We don't have a lot of members there, and they don't have a lot of products with us. And so that green area, which has three blues in all three of the rows, means something needs to be done there. Whereas if you start to look over at the next column where you see orange, you see that that's the strategy is acquisition. What that means is that area, we have some members there that have really great product penetration, like they have, say, mortgages, they have wealth, they have all sorts of stuff with us. So they're great members, but there's just not that many of them relative to the overall market. So it means go find more. Like that's an area where, something's working, at least for that product. Red, so the third column, you can see where you see, it's all three are red. This is an example of where we need to deepen and maintain. Not only do we have, really a lot of members, but those members are great members. So because in this case, all three are red there, this is an area where we have strength. Like we're winning kind of all fronts. And so the idea is defend this area, maintain it. And then finally, the green, which you'll see in a couple spots. That's an area where we need to deepen relationships. And so the idea here is that you can, from a product manager's lens, for example, look at these, say, if you're in charge of deposit products, you can look across them and say, well, okay, in those first two areas, like what's going on there? Is there something similar, or is there, potentially something about our products that doesn't meet the types of people that live in these areas? And so they can look at the areas like, are they more urban? Are they in a specific, center? Like, how do we understand those and develop a strategy for them? Marketing, though, can also look at, for all, say, the orange boxes, say, well, these are areas where we can look to acquire because we know we have strengths, with these people and in this area. So let's go try to find more. And so this allows us to kind of come and be all kind of on the same page with our strategy. So finally, just starting to tie it together. So I've talked about the demographics and how that's, based on Prism. It helps us understand, where people live, helps us understand where to put branches, where to put billboards. We have also the behavioral segmentation, which is the clicks they do, what are they looking at online, the products they bought with us. So we use that to recommend products for them. And then finally, this attitudinal lens, which is how people feel about the world. And so what we've done now is we really use the demographics and attitudinal as this way to bring the two lenses together. So we're saying, from those 10 groups that we originally provided, we're down to 5, but within those 5 Prism segments, there are also now groups of attitudinal groups that we can focus on. So we've really narrowed in on the people that have that value of appreciating the cooperative system and really having a social purpose. There are some people, for example, that want to see the free trade coffee and that's important to them. Others, that makes no difference. Some people want to see, want to purchase recycled products. Other people, it's not relevant. And so what we found is that, within those 5 segments, there's a further refinement of people that are really interested in social purpose, which ties nicely to our purpose and our roots. So that's how we've been able to combine those lenses and create this new group we call Segment 6, which still needs to be named, and allows us to focus. And so how this all really comes together is that we're saying, okay, so we've looked at the marketplace, we've assessed what's going on a number of different levels. We've created this focus with a couple lenses on, so now creating this focus on the Segment 6. We've designed things that take those factors into account, both the products and the marketing. And for example, bringing that to life right now, we have a marketing campaign out, and hopefully, fellow British Columbians have seen it. It's our, We're for Real campaign, which tries to show our values, and we put it, again in market in places where our 5 segments will see them. And now we're also delivering those products. So we're developing the products that will resonate with this group. And our intention is to measure and continue to refine this. So we believe that by tying all these different data points together, leveraging the work that we've done with Environics and other sources, that we're focusing on this specific group that is both demographically and attitudinally aligned with what we're doing, and developing those products and services. And we believe that that is going to be how we're going to win with these Canadians and develop a differentiated position. So with that, I will thank you for listening, and I will open it up for questions.